I had always been a fan of Airbnb for its cozy homes and unique experiences. But that night, the house I rented on the outskirts of town would change everything. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, but as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet, and the air had a strange, heavy weight to it, like something was watching me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but as the night fell, I started to hear soft creaks from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And that's when I heard the door creak open behind me. I froze. Was someone else here? I had booked this Airbnb on a whim, a quiet, secluded house in the middle of nowhere. The listing promised a peaceful retreat, perfect for a weekend of rest. The photos looked charming. A rustic house with a large, welcoming front porch surrounded by towering trees. It was the perfect escape from my busy life. The owner had been friendly and even gave me a quick rundown of the house, mentioning that it had been in her family for generations. She seemed nice, though there was something off about her. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she spoke in a way that made me feel like she was hiding something. Still, I didn't think much of it. After all, it was just a house. What could go wrong? The first night was unsettling. After unpacking, I decided to settle in with a book on the couch, trying to shake off the strange vibe I had been getting since arriving. But as dusk fell, the house seemed to take on a life of its own. The creaking of the wooden floors echoed through the empty rooms, and the wind howled outside, sending shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore it and focus on the book, but there was a constant feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced around, I felt like someone or something was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. At one point, I thought I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, but when I blinked, it was gone. The lights flickered for a second and then came back on. I told myself it was just the storm outside, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of the trees outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that this house, no matter how beautiful it seemed on the surface, held secrets, dark, dangerous secrets. I tried to brush it off, but when I went to bed, I noticed something strange. The closet door in my room was slightly ajar. I had definitely closed it earlier. My heart began to race. I got up to shut it, but the air around me felt colder, almost suffocating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And then I heard it, a soft dragging sound coming from the hallway outside my door. I should have left right then. I really should have. But I stayed. Maybe I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, or maybe I was just too tired to care. But as the night wore on, things took a much darker turn. The dragging sound continued, getting louder with every passing minute. It was coming closer to my door, but whenever I peered through the crack, there was nothing there, just the empty, dimly lit hallway. I could feel the weight of something watching me, like a cold, invisible presence pressing in on me from all sides. The air grew thicker, like it was harder to breathe. I tried to ignore it, turning on the TV to drown out the silence. But then, the screen flickered, once, twice, and went black. The room was now completely dark, except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight. When I shined the light around the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the wall opposite my bed, were dark smudges, like handprints, thick, black, smeared across the white walls. I backed up against the headboard, my breath quickening. The prints weren't there earlier. They weren't. My hands shook as I texted the owner, hoping for an explanation. But the message just sat there, unsent. That's when I heard it again. This time, closer. The dragging sound had turned into something worse, something heavier. It was like something was crawling toward me, slowly, deliberately. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Should I leave? But the phone, my phone, was dead. The battery had drained completely, even though it had been fully charged earlier. The temperature in the room dropped, and I saw my breath fogging up in the air. I tried to get up to leave, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. And then I heard it, a low, raspy whisper just outside my door. It was calling my name. I didn't think. I just acted. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out of the house before whatever was lurking in the shadows found me. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding in my ears, but when I tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. I twisted it, pulled, pushed. Nothing. Panic gripped me. I backed away from the door, glancing around frantically for another way out. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in with an oppressive weight. I turned toward the window. Maybe I could climb out. But when I yanked the curtain open, the sight outside froze me in place. The yard was completely dark, but there was something standing near the trees, shapes, faint and indistinct, moving toward the house. And as they got closer, I could see them more clearly. People, no figures. Their faces were hollow, their eyes black pits. They were walking slowly, deliberately, like they were coming for me. I didn't know what to do. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My legs were shaking, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. In a desperate attempt, I ran to the back door, hoping it would be unlocked. My fingers fumbled with the handle, my whole body trembling with fear. Finally, it gave way, and I burst outside into the cold night air. But just as I thought I was free, I heard a voice clear as day from behind me. "You can't leave." I didn't stop to look back. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to glance over my shoulder. The sound of footsteps followed me, but I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I finally flagged down a passing car. As the headlights blinded me, I glanced back one last time. The house was there, standing silent and still, but I could swear I saw a shadow moving behind the windows. I never went back. That was my experience at the Airbnb house. I don't know who or what I encountered that night, but I've never been able to forget it. I've looked up the house several times since then, but it's never listed again. I tried reaching out to the owner, but she's disappeared, along with any trace of the house itself. It's strange how something that seems so ordinary, so safe, can hide such a dark secret. If I'd only trusted my instincts sooner, maybe I could have left before it was too late. But it's too late now. I still have nightmares about that place, the cold air, the shadows and the whispers that still haunt me. Imagine booking the perfect Airbnb for a weekend getaway, expecting peace and quiet. But what if that seemingly charming place turns into your worst nightmare? This is exactly what happened to me. I thought I was just going on a relaxing trip, but I couldn't have been more wrong. What started as an ordinary stay quickly escalated into a nightmare, one I still can't shake off. From strange noises to an eerie presence, things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. But before I dive into the terrifying details, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of the terrifying stories we've got coming your way. Now, let's get into it. This is my true, unsettling Airbnb horror story. It all started when I booked this cute little cabin in the woods through Airbnb. The pictures online looked like something out of a fairy tale. Rustic charm, cozy interiors, and a perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. I thought it would be the perfect spot to unwind and get some much-needed peace. When I arrived, the cabin seemed just like the pictures, maybe even better in person. It was tucked away in a remote area, surrounded by trees and silence. The host, an older woman named Margaret, greeted me warmly and showed me around. Everything seemed perfect, until she mentioned something strange. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. But remember, the woods around here can get odd at night. She didn't say much more after that, just gave me a smile that felt a little too forced. At first, I brushed it off as a quirky warning, something to make the place feel more mysterious. But little did I know, her words would haunt me soon enough. As the sun began to set and the cabin grew darker, I settled in, thinking nothing could ruin this peaceful escape. But that was before I started noticing the strange sounds coming from outside. As night fell, I settled into the cabin, but something felt off. It was hard to place, like an uncomfortable heaviness in the air. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. But then, I started hearing things. Soft tapping sounds, like fingers on the window. I thought it was just a branch brushing against the glass, but when I checked, the windows were clear. Nothing was out there. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the wind or some animals in the woods. But the tapping didn't stop. It seemed to get louder and more deliberate, like it was trying to get my attention. That's when I started to feel watched. Every time I moved, the noise seemed to follow me. I checked all the doors and windows again. Everything was locked tight. Nothing unusual. But it didn't end there. Around midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was walking through the house. I froze. I was alone. My heart was pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the host, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stayed there in complete silence, trying to steady my breathing, but the room felt colder all of a sudden. I heard a whisper, a faint voice, but I couldn't make out the words. It was almost as if someone was right next to me, speaking just out of reach, and then everything went silent. Too silent. I don't know how long I lay there. But when I finally worked up the courage to check, there was no one there. The hallway was empty. Still, something didn't feel right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. After that night, I thought maybe I had just imagined everything. I told myself that it was probably just the isolation, the strange sounds of the woods, or maybe even a little bit of nerves. But things only got worse the next day. As I woke up, I noticed something odd. There were scratches on the front door, deep and jagged, like something had tried to claw its way inside. But I didn't hear anything during the night, and I hadn't seen any animals nearby. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, but I couldn't help but feel uneasy. That evening, The sun had barely set when I decided to go outside for a walk to clear my mind. The woods surrounding the cabin were beautiful, but they felt suffocating, like they were hiding something just out of sight. I walked along the path, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt thicker, colder, and then I heard it. A low, almost growling noise coming from the trees. It wasn't any animal I recognized. I froze, listening carefully. The sound seemed to move, like something was circling me, watching my every step. I hurried back to the cabin, my heart racing, and locked the door behind me. But it didn't stop. I heard the tapping again, louder this time, almost as if it was coming from inside the cabin. I rushed to check the windows, but there was nothing there. Still, the sound kept coming. Faint scratching noises now, like nails running along the walls. I ran to the bedroom, trying to shut out the noise. But then I noticed something terrifying. The hallway light flickered, then turned off completely. It was pitch black. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow and heavy, just outside my door. I froze, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The sound grew louder, closer. Then the door handle started to turn, ever so slowly. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what was on the other side. The door creaked, and I heard the unmistakable whisper again, but this time it was clear. "You shouldn't have come." My blood ran cold. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat. The whisper came again, closer this time, and then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, waiting, my mind racing. What was out there? Who or what had been watching me? I knew I needed to leave, but something told me it wasn't going to let me go. As I sat there, trying to collect my thoughts, I began to piece together everything that had happened. The scratching, the whispering, the footsteps, everything felt connected. But what did it mean? That's when it hit me. Something Margaret had said. When I first arrived, the woods around here can get odd at night. I thought she was just being quirky, maybe trying to add some mystery to the place. But now, I realized her warning wasn't just a strange quirk. It was a clue. I rushed to my phone, desperate to find something, anything, that could explain what was going on. That's when I stumbled across an old local news article. The headline sent chills down my spine. Local woman found dead near Airbnb cabin. Foul play suspected. The article detailed how a woman, years ago, had stayed at the very cabin I was in. She was found dead, her body mutilated, and the police never solved the case. The chilling part? She had been staying there alone, just like me. I felt sick to my stomach. The story seemed too familiar, too similar to what I was experiencing. The whispers, the sounds, the feeling of being watched. Could it be that the woman's spirit never left? Or was something else haunting the place? I looked around the room, suddenly feeling trapped. This wasn't just a weird coincidence. It was something much darker. And I realized I had made a huge mistake by staying here. I could feel the air grow heavier, like the walls were closing in on me. The room seemed colder now, colder than I could ever remember. The silence was unbearable, but I knew something was coming. I had to get out, but the moment I moved, I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. This time, it was different. They were coming closer, unmistakably close. I could hear the faintest whisper, almost like someone's breath against the door. Then, it happened. The door creaked open, just a crack. My heart was racing, my whole body frozen in fear. The whispering grew louder, and the voice, so chilling, so real, spoke again. You shouldn't have stayed. I couldn't even scream. My mouth was dry, my body paralyzed. I barely saw the shadow at the door, just a dark figure standing there, watching me. But the worst part? I could hear it now, breathing heavily, as though it was waiting for something. I tried to move, to get away, but my legs wouldn't obey. The shadow stepped forward and suddenly I felt a cold hand on my arm. I jolted, gasping for breath, finally managing to tear myself from the bed and run. I stumbled into the hallway, the air thick with dread, but the cabin, it didn't feel like a home anymore. It was a trap, a maze of rooms that seemed to stretch on forever, each door I opened leading me deeper into darkness. I turned back to see the shadow still there, following me, closing in. I finally reached the front door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. But just as I was about to escape, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The shadow was right behind me now. I turned, ready to face whatever was coming. But I didn't see it, only darkness. That's when everything went completely black. The last thing I remember was the feeling of being trapped, unable to breathe, unable to move. I don't know how long I was there, but when I woke up, I was back in my bed, like nothing had happened. I checked every corner of the cabin, but there was no trace of the shadow, no sign of the whispers. It was as if the nightmare had never existed. But I knew the truth. I could still feel the presence, the coldness, the fear lingering in the air. I left the cabin the next morning, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. And I never went back to Airbnb again. Some places are better left alone, and some stories are better left untold. Airbnb, a place where people go to relax, unwind, and escape their daily routines. But sometimes what seems like the perfect getaway hides something far more disturbing. I thought it would be just another peaceful weekend. Quiet, comfortable, nothing out of the ordinary. But I was wrong. Very wrong. Some places have stories. Stories that were never meant to be discovered. And now, I'm about to share mine. It all started when my two friends, Mark and Jenna, suggested we take a break from the city. We were all burned out, work, stress, the usual. So we decided to rent a secluded cabin through Airbnb for the weekend. It was miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by dense woods. The pictures looked perfect. Rustic, cozy, exactly what we needed. But something felt off. The listing had barely any reviews, just one or two vague comments like quiet place and very private. I brushed it off. Maybe it was new on the site. The drive there was long. The roads got narrower, and eventually the pavement turned to dirt. We laughed about how isolated it was, joking about horror movies. But as we got closer, even the jokes faded. The trees seemed thicker, the sky darker, even though it was still afternoon. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, it looked older than the photos. The wood was more weathered, the windows dusty, and for a second, I could have sworn I saw a curtain move in the upstairs window. But none of us had even gone inside yet. I told myself it was just the wind. As we stepped out of the car, an eerie silence surrounded us. No birds, no rustling leaves, just complete stillness. It felt unnatural. Mark tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but even his voice seemed swallowed by the air. We approached the front door, and Jenna hesitated for a second before turning the rusty handle. The door creaked loudly as it opened, revealing a cold, musty interior. The air inside was heavy, as if the place hadn't been lived in for years. The living room was filled with old furniture, dusty, covered in faded fabrics. On the walls hung portraits of people I didn't recognize. Their faces were blurred, almost distorted, like the pictures had aged unnaturally. In the corner of the room stood a tall, antique mirror. Its surface was foggy, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw something move behind us in the reflection. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. We explored the rest of the cabin. The floors creaked with every step, and some rooms were colder than others, despite all the windows being shut. In one of the bedrooms, Jenna found an old music box on a shelf. When she opened it, it didn't play music. It just clicked slowly, like it was broken. She shut it quickly and left it where it was. The strangest thing was the basement door. It was bolted shut with deep scratch marks around the handle. Mark joked that it must be where they keep the monsters, but none of us laughed. That growing feeling of being watched, it never left. That night, the uneasiness only grew stronger. We tried to brush it off, played some music, talked about random things, but the cabin felt colder, heavier, like the walls were closing in. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from downstairs. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy was being pulled across the wooden floor. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. Maybe it was Mark or Jenna, but their doors were shut, and the sound wasn't coming from their rooms. It was coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my phone for some light and slowly opened my door. The hallway was pitch black. Each step I took down the creaking stairs felt like it echoed for miles. I peeked into the living room, but it was empty. The old mirror in the corner seemed darker than before, its surface almost black. And that's when I noticed one of the portraits on the wall had fallen, face down. But how? As I bent down to pick it up, I felt a sudden rush of cold air against my neck. I froze. Slowly turning around, I saw nothing. But that's when I heard it. A faint whisper, so close it felt like it was right beside my ear. It wasn't any language I understood, just a low, rasping murmur. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and hurried back upstairs without looking back. I locked my door and sat on the bed, listening, but the cabin had gone silent again. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something was inside the cabin with us. The next night was worse. None of us slept well. Mark complained about hearing footsteps outside his window, even though our room was on the second floor. Jenna swore she heard someone whispering her name from the hallway. We were all on edge. Around midnight, the power suddenly went out. The cabin was swallowed by darkness. Mark grabbed a flashlight, and we all huddled in the living room, too scared to be alone. That's when we heard it, slow, heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. But we were all downstairs. The footsteps grew louder, closer, like something was pacing above us. Mark, trying to be brave, decided to check it out. I didn't want him to go alone, so I followed. Each step up the creaking stairs felt heavier than the last. When we reached the hallway, it was ice cold. The bedroom doors were all closed, except one. The door to the room none of us had entered yet. It was wide open. Mark shined his light inside, and that's when we saw it. On the far wall, dozens of handprints, small, pale handprints, smeared across the walls. And on the floor, that old music box Jenna had found. It was open and playing, but the tune was broken, distorted, like it was struggling to finish the song. Suddenly, the door behind us slammed shut. We spun around, but no one was there. Then, we heard breathing. Slow, ragged breathing, coming from the corner of the room. Mark pointed the flashlight, and for a split second, we saw it. A figure, thin, almost skeletal, crouched in the shadows, its eyes reflecting the light. It wasn't human. We bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over ourselves, but the front door locked. We hadn't locked it. No matter how hard we pulled, it wouldn't budge, and then the footsteps started again. But this time, they were coming down the stairs. Panic set in. We were trapped, with no way out. The footsteps were getting closer, closer, until we could hear the breathing again, right behind the door. It was only a matter of time before whatever it was reached us. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled on the door one final time. This time, it creaked open, just enough for us to slip through. We ran outside, not daring to look back. We didn't stop until we reached the car. As we drove away, gasping for air, I glanced back through the rearview mirror. The cabin was now a distant shadow, but for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something standing in the upstairs window, watching us leave. We never went back. A few days later, we heard from a local who knew the history of the place. Apparently, the cabin had burned down years ago. No survivors. The listing on Airbnb? A mistake, they said. It shouldn't have been up. But the thing that really sent a chill down my spine was this: the old music box. It was never part of the cabin. It wasn't in any of the pictures, and it wasn't supposed to be there. Who or what put it there? That's the story of our horrifying weekend getaway. Sometimes the things we think are just stories are far too real. Have you ever stayed somewhere that didn't feel quite right? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more chilling true stories, make sure to subscribe to SR's Haunted Stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay safe out there, and remember, not every house wants to welcome you.